This episode of Her Brilliant Health Radio is brought to you by the Shine Shake, energizing, detoxifying, and balancing morning breakfast replacement shake. 18 grams of protein, low carb, no blender required. Just pop it in your shaker bottle with water and shake it and go out the door. Yummy vanilla latte flavor. It'll give you clean burning energy all the way to lunch. Enjoy. Available at KyrinDunstonMD.com. You're listening to Her Brilliant Health Radio, episode number 47.
She used to deliver babies, but now she delivers exceptional wellness for women. Welcome to Her Brilliant Health Radio, where holistic women's health expert and board-certified OBGYN Dr. Kyrin Dunston shares revolutionary insight from leading experts on what you need to know today to treat the root cause of disease, heal, and create the radiant health you've been searching for.
Hey everybody, it's Dr. Kyrin here with another episode of Her Brilliant Health Radio. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today we are going to talk about radical self-care for women. I know you think you know what radical self-care is, or you know what self-care is, but what is radical self-care? And should we even be calling it self-care? That's one of the questions that we're going to be talking about today with my guest, Brodie Welch. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. She's a licensed acupuncturist, board-certified herbalist, and a self-care strategist. She helps self-aware, high-achieving women break the cycle of stress, overwhelm, and self-sabotage so they can enjoy the lives they're working so hard to create and live into their potential. Working at the confluence of wellness and personal development, she has helped thousands of clients optimize their weight, digestion, hormones, sleep, mood, and vitality with strategic support in bridging the gap between what they know they should be doing to take care of themselves and actually doing it without feeling guilty. She's the founder of Life in Balance Acupuncture in Corvallis, Oregon, where she has been treating patients since 2003. She's also the creator and host of A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. Welcome, Brodie.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yes, and as we were just having a little chit chat before we started the episode, we were talking about, should it even be called self-care? I know that in lots of podcasts and when working with clients, whether one-on-one or in groups, self-care is a huge component of what I recommend and help people to understand. But it's gotten to be kind of pat. So let's talk about that. What does that mean? Is it an appropriate term?
Yeah, well, it just seems like so often women are sold this notion that all we need is a spa day and suddenly everything in our lives will be great, and and while I'm a huge fan of spa days, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Truly, when we're talking about self-care, the way we care for ourselves is something that happens moment to moment and day in and day out. And it's not a one and done deal. It's not just going out and getting a pedicure, because that's not really investing in our well-being for the long haul, nor is it really establishing a core competency of what it takes to show up for ourselves. And so I've been thinking more that it's like, rather than thinking about it from self-care as this optional thing that might even feel self-indulgent or selfish, but rather something that's really essential and that is really a way that we embody self-respect.
Oh, I love that. So self-care is not one and done. That's a quotable Brodie Welch right there. And really how we embody self-respect and love, I would say.
Yeah. Like, let me give you an example. If your sister, your daughter, your best friend came to you and said, Dr. Kyrin, I am so exhausted. I have been working like 50-hour weeks. I've been, just like that. My cat's sick, just like this litany of issues. Would you say something like, oh, well, everybody works 50 hours weeks. It's just what you do, like, yeah, well, things happen and you're a machine. So just deal with it, like that, like probably not. You'd probably give her some compassion. You'd probably remind her that we need both activity and rest, that we're human beings and that we can't expect the same things for ourselves when we have emotional challenges, things in our lives that need our attention, that take us away perhaps from our work. And yet so often with ourselves, we feel like we're not doing enough. We feel like we need to just be pushing through whatever it is, that we feel like that if somebody else needs us, or if there's a demand that a deadline that we have to meet at work, that's a good enough reason to blow off the basic signals like tiredness, like even needing to go to the bathroom, or needing to drink water, or being hungry, or needing to move our bodies. And we say, essentially, every time we say, yeah, I hear you, but I'm not going to listen to you, we're telling our bodies, we're telling our souls, you don't matter. You don't matter nearly as much as the doing, the productivity, the outward aspect of who we are. And so from a Chinese medicine standpoint, this is about yin and yang, right? The yin and yang are these forces of dynamic balance that everything in the universe needs and has, but that really are essential for one another's existence. And so if we're just in the society that's glorifying the yang, like the busy, the doing, the faster, the external, the what it looks like as opposed to what it feels like, the presence, the being, the slowing down, the honoring what's inward instead of what's outward, really the feminine. You can't just have that half of the coin, right? That both are necessary for one another's existence. And so as a culture, we are totally yang addicted. And as women, especially having to kind of like extra approve ourselves in this yang addicted world, right? Having to work harder to make the same amount that men do, having the additional assumptions that if we have families or partners or households, that we're the ones responsible for taking care of them, or aging parents or whatever, that the pressures are disproportionately falling on women. And so it's sort of that much more difficult for the most part for us to step into the basics of self-care, right? Or in this case, embodying self-respect, as I'm calling it, whether that's making time to meditate, or making time to do the thing you love most in the world, or to move your body in a way that feels good, or to nourish yourself deeply with food as opposed to just grabbing something that's quick and easy. And that really, so I do see that in our society, we as women, if in order to change this culture, in order to give other women permission to do the same, we need to be embodying this notion of like, yeah, if I wouldn't want that for my best friend or my sister, I shouldn't want it for myself.
Right. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that self-care really is an action, and it can be trivialized with a spa day, but it really is about so much more. And I agree, we are yang addicted. That's so true. And we are yin deficient.
Yes.
And deficient in our feminine, but what does it really involve? So it's having compassion. And I recently did hear someone talking about that. They thought that self-love was overused, and that it's really self-compassion that we're needing to foster, but it's self-respect, self-compassion, self-nurturance appropriately, honoring our own boundaries. So there's so many components to radical self-care. And I guess when I say radical self-care, that's kind of what I'm intimating, is that it's not just a spa day. It's loving and being devoted, having devotion to yourself in a way that you are your most precious relationship, and care and nurturance for yourself is really what's involved. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's something that I've really found that my clients need permission to put themselves at the top of their own to-do list. And it's something that I have a lot of compassion for, because it's been my greatest struggle as well. I absolutely identify with how much I'm getting done, how many people I'm serving or helping, or what kind of a contribution I'm making. And I really struggle with just feeling worthy just by the mere fact that I exist, right? Because it's it really is, it's that reclaiming the yin that can be really difficult. And I think where really spirituality comes in and is a hugely important piece here is recognizing that if there is a spark of the divine, if I am this sort of vessel of consciousness, if I have particular gifts that are uniquely mine, then that a lot of these things can be conveyed with our presence as well as like our doingness. And so like philosophically, I agree with you. And it's also, it's the kind of thing that doesn't come easy in our society, or if we're socialized to be doers, right? Or to be the one who is either an overachiever or a people pleaser, or, like these social masks that sometimes we wear in order to feel okay, and that's very much kind of like it. So again, it can be kind of oversimplified of like, oh yeah, just take care of yourself. It's like, well, that for a lot of people, that's a huge hurdle. It's like, well, what does it cost us to actually do that? And for a lot of us, it's ego death. Right? It requires stopping identifying with a particular something that we've developed in order to feel comfortable, in order to feel like we are, in order to feel safe. And so those are kind of some depletion strategies that I've identified from a Chinese medicine standpoint of these different social masks that we wear, and really getting comfortable with the fact that even stress, right? Like stress there's nothing inherently stressful, but our minds make things into stress. And typically our survival is not being threatened. It's the survival of who we think we need to be in order to be okay. Right. And so it's one thing, I have a coaching group, for example, and we focus on different habits and really automating these mundane things so that we can, so that all of that's just taken care of, and we can turn our attention to where it really needs to go, which is the stuff that's difficult, the stuff that's challenging, or the stuff that is of kind of a higher up on the, it requires more of our full humanity than just existing. So if we can automate those basics and make sure that, for example, you have a bedtime, that you have a morning routine where you align with what's the most important, so that you know how to feed yourself in a way that feels nourishing, like just that these kind of basic, like dead simple body habits, if we can get those to happen on autopilot, we free up so much bandwidth to focus on what really matters. And so it's a lot of times it's like, if we start with the premise that this is actually, that taking care of those things enables us to serve at a higher level and to show up for the people in our lives with presence and with love and patience, as well as giving our gifts to the world far more effectively, that it's we can get to the yang via the yin.
Yeah, and you said something a few sentences ago that I love, is it's so the stress is something about the death of who we think we need to be. Is that kind of
exactly.
Right. And I love that, because you're exactly right. Tell people, well, go out and get me a bucket of stress and bring it back. And you can't, because it doesn't exist really in the world. It's only how we perceive or what we think and feel about what's happening or not happening in our lives.
Yes.
And I wonder, for a lot of us caregivers and women in general, we do. I was watching last night, The Mask You Wear, the documentary. Have you seen that?
I have not, no.
Oh, it's fabulous. And you can watch it on Amazon Prime and a few other outlets. And it's particularly focused on little boys and how they basically garner or don this mask of the masculine, and they're socialized into that, and the costs of that. It's a fascinating documentary. But it just got me thinking about the similar mask for women and what cost that it costs us, I think, our health in a lot of ways. And so I think that our stress a lot of times is the fear of not being able to live up to the mask that we've created that gains us security in society and in our lives. And so it sounds like we're on the same page with that. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I think that mask looks different, kind of depending, like from a Chinese medicine standpoint, we think about the different element types, right? Wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And that may show up different for a person of a different elemental type, right? That basically we can have more of our energy going into, like, we all have all of the 5 elements within us, but usually 1 or 2 will dominate. And if our energy is going towards an element that doesn't really feel like us, it's another way that we distance ourselves from kind of from who we really are, from our essential selves. And so for example, that someone who grows up in a household where achievement is really prized, that sort of upward, outward, driving and striving energy of the wood, of trees growing, for example, like that person might that might be kind of where their energy goes in life, liver, gallbladder. For other people, it might be about attending towards everyone else's needs, making sure that everyone else's needs are met. That's more of an earth type, kind of like the ever nurturing, ever giving, ever loyal, ever generous, but somewhat self-sacrificing. The earth type is probably 2 of the most common survival strategies that I see in my clients. But certainly, that just anything that is an exaggeration of, we may have some of that innately in us, but when it's over the top, it's like it negates the aspect of that person is, for example, entitled to take care of herself as well, right? And that when she does, she's even more able to take care of the other people in her life. And so those kinds of, so we can get really specific and subdivide, but I think that really, to survive in a male-dominated culture, for example, there's pressure to look a certain way. So like it might be a metal strategy of like having the perfect body or the perfect clothes, or just trying to conform to what we're supposed to look like in order to again either feel powerful, or to indeed reap the benefits of the way that our society is set up. And so it may be that like we look at, well, what do I have to trade off in order to have more of me, in order to be more real? And it may be actually letting somebody down. It may be being less in that like untouchable sort of safe zone that we occupy, and trading some authenticity for that. And it's risky. It's hard to do, which is why I think we need each other, that we need to be able to give each other permission to do that, and to really support one another in drawing boundaries, or to filtering things like that, our society's values, through our own set of what we actually prioritize and think is important. And so that our energy, our vital life force, is going there and not to where we think it's supposed to be going in order to feel okay.
Yeah, so giving it more to ourselves in order of trying to almost barter for our value and sustenance from other people by overgiving.
Yeah, sure. Or if that's your particular pathology, yes. Yeah, exactly. And recognizing that, rather than beating ourselves up for like, oh yeah, I've done it again, right? I blew off my meditation because my kid needed something this morning, or like I decided to skip my workout, even though I know that makes me feel good because I had this thing to do at work. Like we recognize, okay, here's where my actions didn't line up with my values, or where 2 things that I value seem to be in conflict, but I ended up picking the thing that like leaves me feeling empty inside, right? That requires it requires a deeper spiritual inventory, but also that typically when we figure out why we made those choices, it's typically because of this ego thing, right? Like this, who we think we need to be in the world. And right. that really, it requires being able to kind of dissolve that and evolve into who we're becoming next, evolve into another version of ourselves that isn't so much that exaggeration. And so, from a Chinese medicine standpoint, that will mean that our energy goes to different elements, that it runs in different directions, that it is, and that we put our qi and blood, right, our life force and our personalities into different patterns. And that's how we enable that. That's how we enable ourselves to not break down and to continue to grow. Because really in Chinese medicine, aging is this, it is defined as a stasis of blood, right? Where our if energy, our life force is like a river and it's supposed to be flowing all the time. And what causes that to stagnate, all right, that essentially, if we are just living in the same habituated, patterned ways over and over again, and we think that that's who we are, that we think that that's who we have to be in the world,
Mhm.
then it's like we close the door to any new possibility of like any other potentiality. And so when we see people who are thriving at age 100, it's because they're always learning, they're always doing something new, they're always experimenting and exploring. And so it's the kind of thing that that as we think about health as being fully, my definition of health is being who we fully are,
Mhm.
mind, body, and spirit, that being fully ourselves and self-expressive and self-actualized, that all of that's a piece of it. But that requires kind of that recognizing when an outdated pattern that keeps us safe isn't good enough anymore, and that we've moved beyond just safety. That the same habits that have helped humanity survive are not the ones that help us thrive, right? Like just looking at our relationship with
Mhm.
sugar, for example, it's like we don't need to be, we're not, like, pretty much, if we're listening to this podcast, we're probably not on the verge of starvation. And so it's the idea that like that's maybe an outdated evolutionary pattern. So is fear, right? Fear has its place. Like we need it to survive. But for most of us, it's like the things that are actually threatening our survival are in our heads. Like they're not actually threatening our survival. They're threatening who we think we need to be. And so to get beyond that, to continue to evolve, it requires making this conscious shift towards it really fully embracing our freedom and all of who we think we could be, instead of just historically what has kept us off the radar screen, or like allowed us to survive in the environment that we grew up in.
You mentioned the five elements, and that
Yeah.
people will tend to be one of those.
Mhm.
How would people listening who maybe have no experience with Chinese medicine and the elements, what information would you share with them that they might know which element they are, and then some ways that they could be in balance with
Yeah.
that element?
Well, I actually have a whole course on this, the basics of Chinese medicine, because
Awesome.
it's really hard to not get lost in jargon and and really, but it can just be as simple as hanging out with these elements, right? That we know that we, like, just by hanging out with water, we know that water seeks its own level, right? Water has its own deep, quiet power. That we know that water is reflective. We know that water, can be peaceful, like you look at a calm lake, or it can be super powerful, like the Pacific Ocean. And so we can look at water, and we can look at the yin and the yang inherent within water, and we can think about, and we can extrapolate for like the kind of person that has those traits, right? That drawn to spirituality and reflection, and sometimes being solitary and being still and being inward. It's the most yin of the elements. Whereas fire, right, dynamic and warm and vivacious and giving and generous, all of these things that fire is, right? Fire is changing all the time. Fire is very stimulating. Fire is manifestation. It's doing it. So a fire type is gonna be an extrovert. It's gonna be someone who really enjoys being around other people's energy. That person is gonna be warm. They're gonna be the life of the party. They're gonna love being on stage. They're, but if a fire type is too much the performer, right? Like that, if it's all an act, right? Like then they're actually disconnected from the very warmth that they are seeking to personify. Like wood element I just described a little bit about, right? That upward, outward driving energy of growth, right? People who want to be leading on the cutting edge, people who like to be teaching, people who like to be the doers, the people who are always like to be in motion, the people who can't relax until they've moved, like that. There's an element of yang inherent in wood. Earth is, that people who are grounded, people who are solid, supportive, generous, social. They're the nurturers.
Mm-hmm.
And then metal is, is refined. Metal's the only element that we don't find in nature that we can work with in a more refined way. And so it's often the people who have a very refined taste, right, are artists, or people who are very drawn to aesthetics, or people for whom, like, there's a rigidity to metal. There's there's a hardness that provides structure. So engineers, tend to be kind of metal types, or that reliance on there being logic to the world, or organization, hierarchy, those kinds of things. So that just gives you a little taste of just kind of how everything in nature also exists inside our human. We as humans are microcosms for the macrocosm that is all that is. And just like, and then that even goes way down, right? Where we can treat just the hand or just the foot to treat the whole body, or we can treat just the scalp to treat the whole body, or just the ear. There's, so we're basically these fractal beings, and we embody all of nature within us. And that the, each of the elements has to do with, like, there's a dimension of the soul, there's a dimension of the emotions, there's an organ system, there's channels in the body. Like, if you refine light through a prism, you can see all the colors. And that's kind of like energy, or chi, or like all that is, right? Energy and matter are the same thing according to Einstein's equation, right? E equals mc squared. We're changing, matter and energy are changing into one another all the time. And it gets hard to talk about if it's just all the same thing. So in Chinese medicine, we subdivide it into yin and yang, or we subdivide it into wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, which go, in each organ system, it lines up with each of those elements. And so, but from a Chinese medicine perspective, we can assess kind of like what's going on in our bodies, right? Like, are we, that we can think about disharmonies of yin and yang within each organ system, right? So let's say that we are stressed out but experiencing digestive issues. It's like that can be, but also insomnia. It's like, well, let's look at the root cause of what's going awry in this person's ecosystem. And because really, and that's really kind of gets at the interconnectedness of all things that Chinese medicine is so good at identifying. And that really, if we look at the whole of what's going on in a person's body and their lifestyle, and come to it and be able to tell a story about all these things that are co-arising, that the symptoms are like the branches of the tree, but the underlying pathology that gives rise to them is like the roots of the tree. Mm-hmm. And so we always like to treat root and branch in Chinese medicine, and we treat them with, well, an acupuncturist could sling needles or prescribe herbs, talk to you about lifestyle and diet. But I really see in my coaching work that applying Chinese medicine philosophy to our lives, that's really kind of the most potent way that we can be our own self-healers, is that understanding that finding our way back to the way of nature helps everything unfold in harmony in the body. And Chinese medicine has thousands of years of wisdom about how to do that. And a lot of it is honoring natural cycles, honoring yin and yang, honoring the cycles of the year and the cycles of the day and the cycles of the month, and recognizing where we are in those cycles, as opposed to living as though we are these mechanical beings, or that we're like these mind, body, and separate, and that and every day is the same, and we should treat, it's just fundamentally, we can't pretend that we are not part of nature, even though kind of like that Cartesian, I think therefore I am, mind body split that happened a few hundred years ago, that kind of dominates medical thinking for the most part. So anyway, I could talk about Chinese medicine all day long, but I won't. I'll let you get back to asking me questions.
No, I think that's a great understanding, and it's so true. And I think that it gets to the heart of radical self-care, because we do tend to treat ourselves like machines, and that we are supposed to be able to program a schedule and follow it and have endless inputs and endless outputs. But we're just not made that way. Just like the weather changes every single day and several times a day, we are living beings that are constantly changing, and our needs at 12 o'clock noon might not be the same at 3:30 p.m. And I think that because of our industrial society, we've really tried to jam ourselves into a machine or Cartesian mentality. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of our health problems are because of it.
Oh, yeah.
so the degree to which we women can recognize our inherent nature as ever-changing beings and flowing and honor that, I think that's a huge part of radical self-care.
Definitely. And that honoring part, I think, is where self-compassion comes in, right? Because it's recognizing that first of all, that it also implies mindfulness, recognizing what is going on for you in a given moment. I'm like, oh yeah, so I've been working for an hour and now it's time for me to get up and drink some water and stretch my legs and go outside, like that. And even just 10 minutes of recognizing what you need in a given moment, giving that to yourself as best you can, that then it's much easier to it's a much more self-compassionate way of being, and getting on in the world. And recognizing that, yeah, like if we're not supposed to have emotions between the hours of 8 and 5, or if we're not supposed to, I mean, like, it's just unrealistic. And, and so often, I mean, I think about myself in college, like I was basically using my body to prop up my head, and that was like really, like it took a very long time before recognizing that, like, yeah, all of this is important, even if all of this isn't useful in some sort of way. And so just recognizing that there's more to life than the singular dimension that we might conceive of ourselves as being important within, right? That there's these different spheres of life, and even operating within a sphere of life like work or like home or whatever, that having bodies isn't an impediment. It's like that we actually, when we honor that, there's quite a lot of intuition and wisdom that we can mine, and a lot of even like all the studies on like high performers these days, I find fascinating about the value of play, the value of rest, right? That like all high performers know that in order to source energy consistently, they need to get really good sleep. And there's like awesome data about the importance of sleep. And yet it's still kind of like hasn't filtered down to the level of where it's like mainstream for us to be really prioritizing that, oh, right, screens need to be going off earlier in the evening so that we're not blocking our melatonin production, so that we can go to sleep early, so we can get up and have a morning routine and check in with ourselves before we jump into either being parents or being people who are working in the world, or people who are just like whatever is our main focus of life. And so but that we are essentially not neglecting any dimension of who we are, including our bodies, including our spirits, including our intuition, including our yin.
And what's interesting is I think that there's a lot of individuality in what we need in these different arenas.
Yes.
For instance, I'm very introverted and need a lot of time by myself, and I need a lot of time in nature, and other people, they might need to be around people more.
Yes.
And really setting our lives up to honor that. So what radical self-care looks like for me probably doesn't look the same for everybody.
Such a good point. Like that idea that we are, of different elemental types, right? We are all different, and that knowing and understanding what helps you recharge is a huge importance of designing your own rock solid, non-negotiable self-care routine.
Let's talk about in the few minutes we have left, what would be some components that people might want to integrate into that for themselves? And I think one of the things we just talked about is being around other people versus solace.
Yeah, we all need connection. Like connection is a huge factor that contributes to mortality and longevity for women, right? Whether or not we're connected to a sense of community. And so we absolutely need to be maintaining relationships and friendships with people that we care about and people that we love. But the amount of time that we spend with those people that we love may vary widely depending on our individual needs for solitude, things like that. So there's that sort of, that could be a yin yang axis, from water to fire. Like all of us have that need for connection. All of us have that need for solitude, no matter who you are. And so finding time for both is absolutely important. Finding time for to align with what matters most. right? That is so a dimension of like, are we paying attention to what's most important on a soul level, right? That like so checking in with whatever that is every day. So if you're an artist, are you making art on a regular basis? If you are, if you are someone who feels connected to nature, are you getting out in nature every day? Like that. So whatever it is that makes you feel like open and expansive or connected or alive, are you doing those things? Are you doing what you love and what makes you feel purposeful? Also, there's I think just part of the everyday, part of that automating the mundane bit is making sure that we are that there is a balance of activity and rest. Right. So like there's the doing and the being. And are we honoring both of those pieces? Because we're going to need both of those at different times in our lives, no matter what we might have going on, or if we have an illness, or if we have, if it's just where we are in a monthly cycle, where we are with what's going on with our families, that we're going to require more or less time of just downtime versus active time.
Right.
I think that we all need to be, like that, to feel like we are contributing to the welfare of others, and so, and like that, the degree to like how much of that can we engage in, because and versus when do we need to step back? So again, like sort of an outward versus inward, where are we putting our energy and attention? And then are we able to have just like the basic legs of the stool of being able to show up in a way where we have presence and energy? And usually that's going to require, it's going to be like food that we can digest, movement of our bodies, time, and adequate sleep, time to connect with ourselves, and time for what matters most. It's like that. If you can get those things on autopilot, then it's like, it's amazing how much more you can accomplish, and with far more ease. And actually ease is another habit that I encourage people to automate, is like being able to find a way to move through the world so that life is not a constant emergency. And that may be the most important thing. Like the term keystone habit gets kicked around, like the habit that helps all the other habits stay in place, kind of like supporting the arches of the arch of a door frame. And so, it's like, if we can figure out how to live, a philosophy of how we can live in the world in a way where we can take things in stride, where we have things in perspective. And for a lot of us, that means like being able to have a practice of either mindfulness, meditation, qigong, is something that takes us outside the flow of thought so that we can observe it with a sense of perspective and keep it in perspective.
Yeah, I love that the overarching keystone of going about life as if everything weren't an emergency. And I oftentimes have to remind myself, it's not an emergency. If I get there a couple minutes late, okay. Just go through my day like, I have to do this and I have to do that. And I have to do this, and just be present. And I love to set intentions for the day. I have a girlfriend and we actually talk every morning, and we set intentions for the day. And oftentimes I set that intention to be where my feet are.
Nice. Oh, I love that. And it's great, right? Because if you start your day from a place of intentionality, you're much more likely to feel as though you've accomplished something at the end of the day, and to not feel like life is overwhelming or frustrating, which is so often what I hear from clients who are quote unquote stressed out, right? That just deciding that like, oh yeah, here's where my energy is going to go today. Here's who needs me on my A game today. Here's what's really important, like, and getting really clear on what those priorities are, because we don't have infinite capacity, and that's actually what makes my life meaningful.
Yes. So Brodie, you've shared so much meaningful information, and I think given everybody listening a lot to consider in their lives about how to really nurture and be compassionate for themselves. And I'd love it if you could give your top 3 take action tips, things that they could just do today that are simple, that could start moving them more towards compassionate and comprehensive self-care.
Okay. I have, first of all, a challenge.
Okay.
Do less than you're capable of today. right? So just like whatever you think you need to be doing, like dial it back. Just what would that be like? This is a check your yang addiction sort of experiment.
Okay.
The others I would say is ask yourself, is like that developing a practice of presence moment to moment. So where you check in throughout the day, maybe set a little timer on your phone or like decide that you're going to do this before you put anything in your mouth, whether that's water or food, and just take a moment, close your eyes and check in and just be with yourself just for a minute, and just because that's a little presence practice of coming back to the moment, coming back to, as you said, like being where your feet are, right? Being where your body is in that moment, because right action can only arise in the moment. It's not something that you can figure out in advance. It must be present to win. And then the third thing I would say is consider, maybe perhaps in one of those moments of presence, ask yourself whether in this dimension of life, whatever it is that you're focused on, like, do you need more yin or do you need more yang right now? Like which direction do you need to go in? And then figure out a very small, concrete, actionable step that will get you closer to that goal.
I love those. Those are beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing them.
You're welcome.
And the name of the podcast is Her Brilliant Health. I'd love it if you could share what that means to you.
Well, I think it's sort of what we've been talking about, that her brilliant health can only be the full expression of embodiment of who she was born to be.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you for your wisdom, and I love this, and self-respect, and you've got some gifts for them. Self-care is so much more. And what made me think of it is the manifesto. I love that.
Yeah.
You have on your website.
Yes, I have a self-care manifesto suitable for printing out and putting above your computer, or on your fridge, or wherever you'll see it, to remind you that you are not, or that you are just as important as anything that you have to do. And so if you need that reminder that you are worth taking care of, and that you have the right to take care of yourself even before the dishes are done and all those emails are answered, you can go to brodiewelch.com. I believe it's /manifesto, but I think you'll probably have it in the notes.
Yes, I'll have it in the notes.
Yeah, I also have a calm and centered bundle of breathing break and a little qigong. It's sort of the world's simplest qigong that involves breathing with our arms and guiding energy down to our lower body, as we do in qigong. And so people can download those for free at brodiewelch.com. I also have a biohacks to relieve stress book which is at the footer of basically every page on my website. And yeah, so all kinds of goodies there. And also just if you're interested in this energetics of life, Chinese medicine stuff, to tune into A Healthy Curiosity each and every week, where I talk to experts and sort of jump in with my 2 cents about what that's like from a Chinese medicine perspective.
I love it. Lots of tools to help support you on your journey. Thank you so much, Brodie, for the work that you do and for all the wisdom that you've shared today. So many blessings.
Oh, thank you so much. Many blessings to you as well. And thanks so much for having me on your show.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Her Brilliant Health Radio. Hopefully you are inspired to take action on some new information you received today. A step towards the bountiful, blissful, beautiful vitality that you deserve. If you have health topics and questions you'd like addressed, please message me on my Facebook page or visit KyrinDunstonMD.com and let me know. I'd love to help. Remember to share this podcast on social media and send it to your friends and family who could benefit from it too. If you love the show, please go right now to iTunes, write a review, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you'll be the first to know when future episodes are available. Thank you again for joining me, and remember, achieving optimal health isn't magic, it's science.